Welcome back to this month's episode of Runners of Louisville. This month we have the one and only Swag Hartel joining us today. Welcome to Runners of Louisville, Swag.
Thank you for the invitation, Allie.
We're excited to get to learn a little bit more about your life and your running career. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So tell us about how you got into running.
Well, when I was 12, 13 years old, I went to a Catholic boys' boarding school in England. And you had to do a sport every afternoon. And I started playing rugby. I'd never played rugby. I was a soccer player. And I separated my shoulder real bad playing rugby. And I had to go to the hospital and get my shoulder put back in. And so after that happened, they said to me, you know, you better find another sport unless you have surgery in your shoulder. You shouldn't be playing rugby. So I didn't really want to get surgery on my shoulder, so I went out for the athletic team. They call it athletics in England. I didn't like long distance. I was a fast kid. And I started running the 880 when I was 14 years old. And that's when I started running. And I ran the 880 when I was the half mile when I was 14 in 2:08. And that was the start of my running career.
Okay. And so in England, did you all have cross country or did you just run track?
We had cross country too, but I did run a little bit of cross country, but I hardly ever ran it. I didn't like doing distance. I was more of a sprinter. You know, I ran the 440 and the 880 in high school. And I even was on the 400-meter relay team. I used to run the second leg on our 400-meter relay team. We won the state championship in that. And, you know, and I had a lot of natural speed, but I never really liked, I couldn't concentrate. I always had trouble concentrating, and I didn't like running long distance. I just got kind of bored, and it just messed with my mind and head.
Okay. So you had a lot of success early on in your running career, and at one point you were the fastest, was it miler or half miler for your age?
Well, when I was 17, I ran 150.8. I was a senior in high school when I was 17 because my birthday was in July. So I graduated when I was 17. And when I was 17, I ran 150.8. And I was the fastest kid in the world that year for my age. I was actually faster than any American kid that year in the high school in the half mile.
Wow. So when you were running in England, did you always think about coming to the States and on a scholarship? Was that something that you were driven and wanted to do, or did that opportunity just come to you and you seized that opportunity?
Well, the opportunity came to me. I didn't really ever think that I would end up coming to America. You know, that wasn't in my plans. But I was really into the English rock music, and I used to read about all the English bands going over to America and used to talk about how great America was. And when I was 16, I read the books of Jack Kerouac. I don't know if you've heard of Jack Kerouac, but he wrote a very famous book called On the Road. And I always really wanted to come to America. I always had this feeling it was the land of milk and honey and, you know, the great new world still to me. And so I always was fascinated by America. And then when I was 17 and I ran that well at the half mile, I got a lot of American scholarship offers. And there was an assistant English coach at Western Kentucky University called Alan Launder. And he came all the way to England to recruit me. And because of him, I came to Western Kentucky University. When I was 18 years old, I came over here.
Okay. And then talking about your running career at WKU, what are some of your fondest memories, maybe racing or just with your teammates?
Well, you know, when I came over here, you know, when I was a sophomore, we had Nick Rose come over from England, and he was a 3-time NCAA champion, and he had an amazing effect on the whole running culture at Western Kentucky. Then we had quite a few other English guys come over. And when I was a junior and a senior, we got second 2 years in a row in the NCAA cross-country championships, which is pretty good for a little school out of Kentucky. And I ran I had to run cross country when I came over to America. And as I got older, I got better and better at it. And by the time I was a junior, senior, I was pretty decent at cross country. But I was still running the half mile till I was a senior in college. And when I was a senior, I started running the mile. And we had 1975 was my senior year at Western Kentucky, and we had a tremendous team that year. We had a world-class guy in every track and field event except the pole vault. And we had an amazing team. We got 4th in the NCAA outdoors, 3rd in the NCAA indoors, and we got 2nd in the NCAA cross-country championships that year. Wow. Western had an amazing program at that time.
Right. And a lot of people, and Nick, I know you still talk to Nick pretty regularly now and just reminiscing on days. And what it was like running together. And then you moved with Nick to Louisville and started training here. So what brought you to Louisville?
Well, after I tried to make the British Olympic team in 1976, me and Nick, and neither of us made the team in 1976. And we went back to Bowling Green, and it was just becoming where running was opening up and amateurism was falling, and you could run professionally, and there was road races starting to pay money out, and it became where running, you could actually make money running. So in the fall of 1976, we were living in Bowling Green, and there was a guy called Lou Schneider who owned an advertising agency in Louisville, and he was really big into running, and he wanted to start a track club in Louisville. And so he got me and Nick Rose these little part-time jobs and helped us move up to Louisville. And in January 1977, me and Nick moved up to Louisville. And the first month I was in Louisville, the highest the temperature got was 23 degrees. It was bitter. And we were running twice a day in that weather with, leather running shoes and, didn't have the gear we have today.
Right.
But we were very tough and determined, and that year I moved to Louisville in 1977 with Nick Rose, and I got to like Louisville so much that I ended up settling here in the fall of '78 and staying here in Louisville. Okay. And Nick was very close to his family in England, and he ended up moving back to Bristol, England, where he was from. Okay. And still lives there to this day.
Cool. So just thinking about now moving to Louisville and training here, you moved to the roads. When did you move to the roads? You still ran a lot of track races, but then you started running more on the roads and going a little bit longer.
I still ran on the track till 1978. I went back to England in the summer of 1978, and I ran a 4-minute mile over there, and I still ran on the track in '78. And then I moved to England, back to Louisville in the fall of '78, and I got married and settled here in Louisville. And I realized my track days were getting, you couldn't just keep traipsing over to Louisville to run track races. And once you get out of college, it's very hard to run track in America. So in the fall of 1978, I started running road races. And then the road race boom started in like '79, '80 here in Louisville. All of a sudden, it was amazing how many people started running. When I first moved to Louisville with Nick and we saw nobody out running. And then all of a sudden, it was just people just all over Southern Parkway and Iroquois Park, and people running everywhere. There was this huge running boom in England, in Louisville, back in the late '70s, early '80s. Yeah. And that's when I started running road races in late '78 and '79.
Okay. So in thinking about some of those road races that you ran, and you ran a lot of them in Louisville, but you also had the opportunity to go all across the country, other countries. What is one of those races that kind of just sticks out for you as memorable, or maybe you really enjoyed the course or the competition? What's one of those races that sticks out?
Well, the best race I ever ran in my life, Allie, was in 1975. I ran in the British 3A Championships, and back then it was one of the most prestigious track meets in the world. And it was the British Championships. It was open to anybody anybody else in the world. And so lots of really top runners from other countries would come in and run this meet. And on Friday night, I ran my heat, and there was an amazing amount of good guys in my heat. There was like 8 sub-4-minute milers in my heat. And I ran 3:41.2, and I jogged the last 30 yards because I realized I was in third place and I would make the final. Mm-hmm. And the next afternoon, I lined up for the final, and I was the slowest guy in the race. And it was like the who's who of miling at that time. All the best guys in the world were in this race. And I thought, there was a good chance I could get last in this race. But the race went out real slow, and nobody would take it. And then we went out for the first half mile in 2:02. And then Danny Milan, who was from South Africa, who was an amazing runner back then, he ran the third lap in 53 seconds. And he just left everybody behind, and nobody could go with him. And I just hung with the pack. And I got down to the last lap, and I'm still with the pack, and I ended up losing second place by 100th of a second to a guy called Frank Clement from Scotland. Wow. And I ran 3:40.6 and made the British national team, and that was probably the best race I ever ran. I beat a lot of great runners that day. There was loads of great runners in that race, and probably the best race I ever ran. Right. When I look back on it. And I always thought I could run way faster, but those days never came. I was just in great condition, and and then it was just one of those things that happen.
Mm-hmm. Wow, sounds like it would have been an incredible race to watch and to be a spectator at, because having all of the best right there lined up together, being able to race each other. One thing that amazes me is your memory, how you remember that, what your splits were and how you felt in races. You've been able to do that for as long as I've known you. You've been telling me, oh, I ran this pace, this race, this is how I felt, this is who is in that pack. And it just amazes me that you can remember all of that.
Well, it's just like when I sold shoes, Ali. There was people that came in here all the time, and I wouldn't even know their name, but I could remember their shoe size. I don't know why, but it's just something I've had inside me. They'd come in my door here, and I wouldn't even know their name, but I'd know exact shoe size they'd wear because I'd put them in shoes years ago.
Right.
I don't know why, but I just, for some reason, I can remember things like that.
Yeah. So now, just thinking, to what extent has running impacted your life?
Well, it's been everything, Ali, because, you know, I grew up in an orphanage and never had anything, grew up very poor in England. And running was what opened the door for me. I came to America on a scholarship. I ended up, you know, becoming a professional runner. Then I opened up my shoe store, and my shoes, the big part of the success of my shoe store was my reputation in running and my knowledge in running. So running has been just unbelievable for me. It's been basically my whole life, you know. It's made me what I am. And I'm not like, you know, I don't live and die by running anymore, but it was just my whole life. I ran competitively till I was 43 years old.
Right.
So I ran, and I don't think there's many people who ran as many races as I've ran. I know that from 1979 to 1985, I ran 64 10Ks on the roads in under 30 minutes.
Wow.
And I ran an amazing amount of races back in my day. I ran an amazing amount of track races. I estimate I've ran thousands of races back in my time.
It's a lot,
You know,
a lot of miles, a lot of shoes.
Yep, that's for sure.
Good thing you know a guy or know a place where you can get them, right?
Well, when I was in college, I started getting sponsored by Onitsuka Tiger, which became ASICS in 1980. And all the years I was a runner till I, you know, gave up professional running, I was always sponsored by a shoe company. And then I opened up my own shoe store, so I was really lucky. I always had good shoes, and I always changed my shoes and took care of my feet. And even to this day, I'm 70 years old now. And when I was 65, I didn't run from when I was 45 till I was about 65, and I started running again. And now I can run 4 miles at 6-7 minute pace. And I have nothing wrong with my knees or my back and my hips. And I'm so lucky because all the guys that I knew that I ran against, none of them can run anymore.
Right.
They're all beat up and had surgeries, or all gotten fat or whatever. You know, and I'm very, very lucky.
Right. So then, talking about shoes, I know just growing up, you coached me, and you always said it was important to have like multiple shoes in my toolkit. So if you're training for a marathon, having multiple shoes to train in so it changes the stress on your body, or if you're doing tempo runs or track workouts, to have racing flats and different things like that. Do you think having the opportunity to have different things as technology evolved within shoes, do you think that helped to save your body in terms of the pounding? And
Well, when I moved to Louisville in 1977, Ali, I was being sponsored by Onitsuka Tiger. And me and Nick Rose were running 90 miles a week, and we were wearing leather running shoes with no cushion, little thin soles. And that was as good as you could get back then. And luckily, we were able to survive it because we were light and very fast, and we only weighed 130 pounds back then. But as I got older, you know, and I started running road race in the 80s and all the shoe technology came in, it made a huge difference to me that I had different shoes, and I was able to switch my shoes. I was running for years and years, I was running 60 to 80 miles a week. And I would run twice a day, and I would switch my shoes. I'd wear a different shoe in the morning, different shoe at night, and I'd have shoes for long intervals, shoes for real fast, short stuff. So it made a big difference, yes, and I really believe it's one reason why I've survived it, and I've seen so many top runners actually fall by the wayside from running too many miles in worn-out shoes or going for all the light stuff, you know, and eventually falling by the wayside, you know, with their footwear, just, you know, gotten injured and hurt that they can't run anymore. So I've seen a lot of that, and even great runners.
right. And you said as you have gotten back into running when you were 65, what are you enjoying most about it now? Because it's not competing and all of that you're doing. You're getting out there and you're putting in work, but it's not the races or setting PRs that's driving you now.
Well, you know, I mean, I ran all these years always having to wear a watch, and now I don't even wear a watch when I run anymore, because I found even when I started running again, I became like a slave to the watch, and now I just go out and run, and I just feel so lucky that I can still run, because I live on Southern Parkway, and I run down Southern Parkway most of the time, and and I'm just amazed that I'm still out there doing it at 70 years old, and I can still run at 6-7 minute pace, while most people, can't even do that anymore. So I'm just amazed that I can still do it, and I just realize how lucky I am that I'm fortunate enough to do that. And I don't, I thought about getting back into competition, but then I found it just ruined all the fun of running. I always did run because I liked running, and I think that was one reason why I stuck with it so long. I always, competition was once so important to me, but I always loved the feeling of just getting out there and running. And I think that's a very important thing, because if you're going to be a really good runner, you've got to like running, because you have to train so hard that if you didn't, you just become a head case,
Right.
You just become a basket case. I've seen guys that had loads of talent as runners, but they just didn't really enjoy running, and those guys never lasted long.
Right.
They came up and ran really well for a while, but they just didn't last a long time.
Right.
They fell by the wayside.
So I'm thinking about one of the races that you actually ran at least 3 times. And a question we often get asked in the store, because at the South location, we have your trophies hanging up in a case in here. And they're the guns that you won at a race. Will you tell us about that race? And there's 3 different ones, because you got first, second, and third. And we always tell people you wanted the entire collection, so you had to go 3 times and get all 3. But what race was that, and the distance, and just tell us about that race.
Well, remember I was telling you there's a huge running boom in Kentucky around 79, 80, and all these races started coming up, and it was amazing. People would put on races then, and you could get 2,000 runners, just a local race. And back then it was only $15 or $10 to run the race. But in 1980, there was this race that was in Winchester, Kentucky, which is near Lexington, about 10 miles from Lexington. It's a town called Winchester, and they put on this race called the Daniel Boone Pioneer Run. And I went to the race in 1980, and it was a lot, and it was over 2,000 people in the race. A lot of people from Lexington, people from Louisville came, and there was a ton of good runners. There were so many good competitive runners, and I ended up only getting 3rd in a race and getting the small gun. And then the next year I went back again because I wanted to get the big rifle, but the day before the race, there was a race in Radcliffe, Kentucky, where they were giving away a motor scooter to the winner. So I ran in 10K on the Saturday, and then went to this race on the Sunday. And I was so tired from the race on Saturday that I ended up getting second to a guy called Tommy Smith, who was from Corbin, Kentucky. And he was a tough runner, but I usually used to always beat Tommy. But Tommy ran the race of his life, and I had a bad day, and he beat me. So the next year, 1982, I went there, and I really wanted to get the big gun because I had 3rd and I had 2nd.
Right.
And I had to run against my arch rival, Dwayne Gaston,
Okay.
who that year in 1982 won the mini marathon and set the record around 1:3:24, and his record stood to like 2010. And Dwayne was really tough, and we had a real tussle that day because he was a big, tall, lanky guy, and the course in Winchester was very hilly. It was all up and down, and I would go up the hill real hard and drop him. He'd come flying past me on the downhill, and it was like that the whole race. And then finally we got down to the last half mile, and I knew I could beat him. And when it got down to the last half mile, because he didn't have my leg speed. I was a much faster runner than him, and I outkicked him, and I got the full. So I got I got the Daniel Boone Pioneer. The Daniel Boone is a Daniel Boone long rifle. That gun.
Okay.
That's what it is.
Cool. So you mentioned the KDF mini marathon, and that for you, a half marathon was a lot further than a half a mile, and then the distances that you were doing. Then you moved to 10K, but that is a huge race in Louisville, and I know people for years and years kept asking, when are you going to do the mini marathon, or have you done it? And that's just what everyone in Louisville knows as the race. And so when was your first time running the mini marathon?
Well, when I moved to Louisville, the mini marathon, first year they had it was 1974. And it really, because the Derby Festival, it really gripped the local community, and anybody who ran in Louisville, that was the race to them. Right. And so when I moved to Louisville in 77, we'd meet people and they'd find out I was a runner. They'd always say, have you run the mini marathon? I'd say, no, I don't do that long stuff. I'm a half miler. So, and then when I settled in Louisville in the fall of 78, I started running road races. So I had to run the mini marathon in 79. That's all everybody asked me about. And people in Louisville, they didn't care whether you'd ran a 4-minute mile. It was all, what have you done in the mini marathon? So I ran the race for the first time in 1979. And it was only my second half marathon I'd ran. No, I'd actually ran 2 in Dayton. I'd ran 2 half marathons in Dayton, Ohio, where I got paid to run. So I ran the mini marathon in 1979, and I was lucky enough to win the race, and I won the race. And then I ran it 5 more times, and I never ever won it again. I got second every single year.
Wow.
And I was just fated. But I never really, the half marathon was a long way for me, and I never did the high mileage. Like Dwayne Gaston, he was running 130 miles a week. I was running 70 miles a week. And when you run those real long races, that makes a big difference. And I never did the high mileage. And so I think, I just didn't like training for the real long races. So I was better at the shorter. 10K was like the longest I liked to go, to be honest.
Right. So then talking about other races that you ran, and I'm reminded of another picture that we have in the store, and I believe it's from the Iroquois Hill Climb. Is it the one that's right up there? And in that race, tell us about that race, because you all brought in some big names at the time in running for this race. So tell us about that race, who you ran with, who was in the race.
Well, the Iroquois Hill Climb, when I started my business, I had a partner, and we started, and so we opened, the store opened up in October 1980, and so we put a race on in October 1980 up in Iroquois Park called the Iroquois Hill Climb. And the first year we had the race, me and Nick Rose ran it together and tied. We beat Dwayne Gaston, and we just ran it together and tied. Right. We actually ran a race the day before in New York City, so we were tied. Wow. But anyway, the second year of that race, we brought in Bill Rogers to run the race. And Bill Rogers back then was like the most popular. He was known all over the world. He was like, the running boom had hit America, and he had just won Boston and New York City marathon 3 or 4 times in a row, and he was known as Boston Bill, and Bill was a great guy, and I'd met him at different races. So we paid Bill Rogers to come in and run the Iroquois Hill Climb. He got $6,000 to run the race, plus all his expenses. And he came in to run the race, and it was amazing. There was probably 3,000 people in Iroquois Park just watching the race. There was so many people that the place was covered with people watching the race. And so the race went up to the top of Iroquois Park, and Bill had a reputation of being the fastest downhill runner in the world. He was a great downhill runner. And we had a big long downhill once you went up to the top of Iroquois Park. So I decided, especially as I was my store was sponsoring the race, to make it a hard race on Bill. So I took the lead going up the hill in Iroquois Park, and I ran the first mile going uphill in 4:32. Wow. And that wasn't really that hard to me. It was a long, gradual hill.
Right.
And anyway, I broke away from Bill and this guy called Larry Cazort, who had also ran at Western Kentucky and was a world-class runner. And on the downhill, Bill and Larry Cazort caught me, and I pushed the race to like 5 miles. Then Larry made a move, and he broke away from me and Bill. And I ended up getting third, and Bill was second, and Larry Cazort won the race, and he ran 28:50. Wow. And on a very hard course, as you know, in Iroquois Park. And the sad thing about it is, just a few months ago, I went to Larry's funeral. He died up in Indianapolis at 64 years old, and I went to his funeral just a few months ago.
Right.
And Bill's also fallen on hard times. I know he's had cancer over the last 5 or 10 years, but I think he's doing okay now.
Okay.
And he lost all his money, the poor bloke.
So, talking about Iroquois Park, you have run a ton of miles in that park. And so then you also have been involved and just stepped down from being president of the Iroquois Hill Runners. And so what are just some memories that you have of the park, or some of the races that the Iroquois Hill Runners put on and you've been able to be a part of? And
well, when I moved to Louisville, one reason I moved to the south end of Louisville is I thought me and Nick Rose didn't really know Louisville. We just wanted to find a good place to run, and we thought Iroquois Park was wonderful. So we moved by Iroquois Park, and every day we'd run, our typical day, we'd run twice a day. We'd run 6.5 miles in the morning, 6.5 miles from night, and that included 1 lap of Iroquois Park each morning and night. And I ran around Iroquois Park every day for years and years and years. And I claim at one time I've ran the most laps of anybody at Iroquois Park. I've ran that park thousands of times. Right. Knew every crack in the road there. And so I've ran the park, and Iroquois Park is such a wonderful place. And then the Iroquois Hill Runners started in 1979, and they made me an honorary member of the club. And when I was, in 1997, I became the president of the club, and I've been the president since 1997. But I resigned this past week I knew it was time to move on and bring some young blood in, and we've got we've got some nice new young people in the club, and it was time to step down and move forward and let those people move forward. And but I always have great fond memories of Iroquois Hill Runners, and I'll always be a big supporter of the club and do what I can to help them.
Right.
And I love Iroquois Park too.
Right. And you have the fastest time recorded, right, around the park, at least with the Iroquois Hill Runner races. And what was that time in that race?
Well, in 90, I really believe that if I'd ever ran around Iroquois Park in a serious race with competition, I could have ran at one time maybe under 14 minutes around Iroquois Park. But Nick Rose could have beaten me by 20 seconds. He was so much better than me.
Right.
And I mean, well, there's a lot of guys who can beat me. But in 1980, there was a race put on Iroquois Park by the March of Dimes, and it was a charity race, and they put on this race there. And the winner of the race got the free use of a Mercedes-Benz for a week.
Oh, right.
So I went up to the race thinking, I'm going to win this race to get this Mercedes-Benz and drive around for a week. I was driving a little Volkswagen back then. So I turned up at the race thinking there'd be somebody really good there, and there was nobody there really to challenge me, and I just went out real fast, and I ran, pretty hard, but I had no competition, and I ran 14:22 that day around Iroquois Park, and nobody's ever beaten my time as far as I know.
Right.
But there's a lot of guys, world-class guys that could beat it. But you've got to give even a good guy, he's going to have some incentive. It's still a hard run.
Right.
They're still running 4:30 mile pace around the park.
Oh, for sure.
You
Yeah.
know. Yeah. But one day records are made to be broken. One
Right.
day I'll just be an asterisk.
In talking about just your impact on the running community, you have opened 2 running stores that have heavily influenced our community, and like you sponsor a ton of races within the community, whether that's cross country or road races, and then being a part of the Iroquois Hill Runners and just being kind of a figurehead for running in the community. What's some of those things that you have really enjoyed about being able to be part of so many things in so many aspects?
Well, I'm so glad I'm able to give back, because Louisville has been so good to me. One reason why I stayed in Louisville is I just found people were just so friendly and nice, and I've had so much support from people in this community, and that's what made my store what it is. And so I'm so happy. And I remember the days I was out there running races, and I was killing myself just to win $100. And now I'm giving all this money back to running, and it's so good to be able to help. And Louisville's just been so good to me, and running's been so good to me, that you have to give back. And I don't know why, but God blesses you. I found the more you give, the more blessings you seem to receive. And I've been just so fortunate to have what I have, Allie. I've never been motivated by the money. Money was always a secondary thing to me. But I'm so glad that I can do things to help this community and help this town, because I love Louisville, and it's really my home now.
So in wrapping things up, a question that we often get is, how did you get the name Swag? So we're going to take it back to Western, and that's where the name Swag started coming to be, and people started calling you Swag. But how did you get that name?
The baseball coach at Western Kentucky, and I can't believe I can't remember his name right now. I'm trying to think of his name. But when I came to Western Kentucky, there was a baseball coach down there, and he'd been there for over 20 years, and he had a very good program. And he wanted to meet me. He was actually from Louisville. He actually grew up in Louisville and went to Male High School. And I think he started coaching baseball at Male. I'm trying to think of his name now. But anyway, the baseball field at Western is named after him. But anyway, I'd only been in America a few weeks, and he wanted to meet me because I'd had got a lot of publicity coming over here, being the fastest kid in my age at that time. So he came to the track locker room one day and to meet me, and he asked me how I liked America. And I said, I love it here. It's so good. But I said, there is one thing I don't like. And he said, well, what's that? And I said, the radio station. It is so bad. I'd come back over from England, listen to all the great bands in England, and I come over here and they're playing Donny Osmond, and the Archies, and it was so useless. I couldn't believe how bad it was. And, I guess, Bowling Green then was just a town of 35,000 people, and I guess I should have expected that. But anyway, next day, he came over to the track locker room and he said, I'm taking you down to the radio station. And he took me down to the radio station and introduced me to the program director, and they offered me a job on the radio station. And I had a show every Saturday night on the radio station. I was on from 9 o'clock to midnight on Saturday nights. And I wanted to get a catchy name on the radio because my real name is Irwin, and it wasn't a very good radio name. And so I made up the name Swag and called myself Swag on the air. And this show went over great in Bowling Green, and it became huge, and all the kids on campus were listening to it, and having parties listening to it. That's when people actually listen to the radio. And everybody started calling me Swag, and that's how I got the name Swag. I just made it up to be a radio name, and that's how I got the name Swag.
Wow. And now that's the only name most people know.
And now it's become this huge word, and I should have copyrighted it. I wouldn't have to sell any more shirts.
Well, thank you for coming here tonight and for being part of our Runners of Louisville segment. I know a lot of people are going to be excited to get to learn more about you as a runner, as just your life and your story. So thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you, Allie.
Yep.